The focus of this tutorial will be a comparison between the resulting image when you take a JPEG and develop it in Adobe Camera Raw as if it were a raw file, or if you develop it directly in your editor workspace. I'm going to repeat it on several images. I'm going to start by doing it in a new version of Photoshop Elements, and then I will do one of them in Photoshop CC for those who are using it. But the procedures are basically the same, except that if you're working in Photoshop CC, you have a lot of options, which I'm not dealing with in this lesson at all. So you have the files I gave you. So if you will go to File, Open, and if you will navigate to the folder called Remote Class May 16th, 2020, and you will notice that I have 3 different waterfall series. I have Alaska, Oregon, and a waterfall series. I also have an envelope, a little folder that says RAW versus JPEG tutorial images. It goes with a specific file that is comparing just RAW and JPEG. And I think most of you are aware that the quality you will get in starting with raw data is going to be greater. And that kind of repeats that. But we're going to do the comparison of what happens when you develop a JPEG. And this is pertinent because if you're using your camera phone, you may find that you don't have an option to work with raw files. Now, they keep improving these, so that may occur at some point. But if you, for any reason, have a camera that gives you JPEG images, it's important for you to understand that those JPEGs should be developed in Adobe Camera Raw. I might also mention that if every image you take is put into Lightroom, when you go into the Develop module, it doesn't care whether you have a JPEG or a Camera Raw. It lets you use the Camera Raw adjustments there. But I'm talking about many people who are just dealing with straightforward software such as either Photoshop CC, an early version of Photoshop, or one of the versions of Photoshop Elements. So I'm going to start out with the waterfall series. I'm going to open that up, and I want you to notice that I've given you the same image in a raw format, and I've given you 2 copies of its JPEG. I'm not going to work the RAWs for this one, but if you want to go back and repeat the tutorial where you compare RAW and JPEG, you can include the RAW files in each one of these series. But for our purposes, we're going to say what's the difference if I take a JPEG file and I develop it through a Camera Raw, or if I develop it directly in the editor workspace of your software. So we're going to start with the waterfall 4874 RAW. That just simply says this is the one you should open in Camera Raw. So when you select it, before you open it, you will have the options of seeing what format it is choosing. This poor image has been so trained to open in Camera Raw that it's already saying that. But if on your computer you see it say JPEG, which is what I would expect, it means that if you were to proceed, it would open in the editor workspace. And to make it open in Adobe Camera Raw, you take that format, pop it open, come up till you see near the top Camera Raw. You're telling the software, treat this as a raw file. Then when you click open, it will go through and open in Adobe Camera Raw. Now, I tried very hard to have all these images untouched, but I've noticed this one, when I open it, has got adjustments on it. So I'm going to click the word default, and hopefully before you get this, I will have corrected it. But just check to be sure that everything is set to 0 and that white balance is as shot. Then you're going to see just the way it came from the camera. And now I'm going to make just one simple adjustment on these images to try to match the development so you will clearly see how the quality changes. So in these images, they're slightly underexposed. As you can see, this edge here is not used. And to make it simple, we're going to grab the white slider. We're going to hold down the Alt or Option key and grab the slider. Your screen turns black. And as you bring those pixels up toward the white end, the bright end of it, you'll get to a point where all of a sudden pixels show. Back up till the screen is totally black and lift your hands. We've only made one adjustment. Now I realize if you were working this image, you'd probably make a lot of other ones. But But for this experiment, that's all we want to do. So come down and tell that image to open, and it will open in the editor workspace of whatever software you're using. Now comes the fact that we want to make approximately the same adjustment without using Camera Raw. So go back up to File, Open, and you see the 4874 image that doesn't say RAW. That one we want to open directly in the workspace of the editor. So when you open it, check its format. Be sure it says JPEG. Sometimes images get opened in Camera Raw and they remember that. You want this one to definitely be treated as a JPEG. Open it and it will open directly in the editor workspace. And you'll notice in its histogram, and you want to have that histogram panel open, that you've got that same gap that you had on the other. So the way we're going to adjust it so that it's parallel to what you did in RAW is we're going to the doorway to the adjustment layers. In Elements, it's at the top of the layers panel. It's a bicolor circle. If you're on Photoshop, any version, it'll be at the bottom of the layers panel, but it'll still be a bicolor circle. And when you click to open it, you're going to see many adjustment layers in full Photoshop, but the one we all want to use is called Levels. This is the basic adjustment that works on exposure. So I'm going to click on that, and guess what? I once again see that I have an image that isn't fully exposed. And so I can't pull the pixels to the right bright end, but I can bring the bright end into the pixels. So if you will take your mouse and find the white triangle at the white point, hold your Alt or Option key down, and you're going to get your black screen again. This time, drag that back until it gets to the histogram, and you'll see, oops, pixels start to appear. Back off, lift your hands. Now you've done the same image two ways. You've done it with a very simple adjustment in the editor workspace, and you did it with a simple adjustment in Adobe Camera Raw. And we're going to check the difference between the histograms. So can you see the little histogram panel? If you don't have it, you need to go up to the window menu and open the histogram panel. So here's the histogram panel for the image worked on in the editor workspace. Now go to the other image, bring it up, and this is the histogram of the image that we treated in Adobe Camera Raw. That's all we did, was one tiny adjustment. If you proceeded and did other adjustments on an image, you would continue to degrade it if you are working directly in the editor workspace. So let's check it again. This is the one that went through Camera Raw, and this is the one that was opened directly in the editor workspace. And that picket fence is because for pixels to be adjusted on a JPEG image, the darker pixels are deleted. It actually goes through and deletes some of the data to make it get lighter. Whereas in Camera Raw, you're working with electronic data. You can make adjustments, and then after, when you leave the Camera Raw window, is the first time your image will be given pixels. So this one we're going to close. Don't bother saving it. You can play with it later. Just save both of those images. And we'll do one more here, and then I'll turn to Photoshop CC. So let's go back, File, Open, and leave the waterfall series. Go back to Remote Class, May 16th, and let's go to the Alaska waterfall series. And again, if later on you want to compare it to the RAW file, I've given it to you. But we're going to work with the two JPEGs. They're identical ones. I marked one RAW because that's the one I want to open in Camera Raw. So I'm going to come down to where I can see the format. It says it already knows it's supposed to go to Camera Raw, so I don't have to change it. But if your software says JPEG, then you must go through and change it. For instance, in here, the JPEG would be down here, and if mine said JPEG and I wanted to open in Camera Raw, I would pop this open, come up until I found the Camera Raw option. Now it will open in Adobe Camera Raw. And again, I'm sorry that I gave you one I thought was all defaulted. I'll try to improve it before you get it, but check to be sure the default button has been checked and there's nothing that isn't 0 all the way up. This is the way the camera picture came as it came out of the camera. And if you look up, you'll see that it has low contrast. Consequently, both the dark and the white end, black and white ends, don't have pixels. So we're going to do two things on this. We're going to drag the white point out till it reaches the end. So grab the white point, hold the Alt or Option key, and drag this, and you get a black screen. And you're going to watch. When you start to get pixels, you back off till there are no pixels showing. You lift your hand. And then we want to take the blacks down to the end. So we're going to grab the black point, hold the Alt or Option. This time you'll get a white screen. And as you drag those pixels toward the black end, you'll get to a point where you see some pixels. Just back up so you don't see any and lift your hands. So we've done one simple adjustment to make up for the fact that the lighting was such that this was basically a very low contrast image. And of course, it was taken a long time ago. And what we all know is if I saw that histogram in camera while I was taking the picture, I should have increased the exposure to bring the right side as far to the right as I could. But this was done in the days before that knowledge was around. So once I've done that, I'm ready to open that JPEG in the editor workspace. Now I want the other version and open it directly in the editor workspace. So I'm going to File, Open, and I already opened the one with the word RAW. I'm now going to open the other JPEG, and before I open it, I'm going to check its options and see, guess what? It remembered somebody had opened it in Camera Raw, and I want to open it as a JPEG. So by checking that, I change the format to JPEG. Now it will open in the editor workspace. And again, if you look at the histogram, it has the same problem of having low contrast. So we need to extend the pixels out to the ends. And to do that, we're going to go again up to the bicolor circle and choose levels. And I have to bring both ends in to meet the pixels. So I have my Alt or Option key down, and I'm going to get the white point. And of course, it's going to turn black, and I'm going to drag it in till I begin to see pixels appear. And then I went too far. I back up till the pixels are disappeared. I lift my hands. And now I want to correct the blacks. So I grab the left black point, hold the Alt or Option key, bring it up till it touches the histogram, and watch the white screen. When I see colors appear, I have to back up. I don't want to make any of it go over. So what I've done is I've done the best to help make that simple adjustment. It isn't done, but I've made something to be similar to what was done in Camera Raw. And so now I need to compare their histograms. So we've got the one developed in the editor workspace. Let's look at its histogram. Let's go over and look at the same image developed in Camera Raw, and look how solid the data is. This is to intend to help you understand that it's important that you understand that when you have a JPEG to develop for any reason, don't work on it directly in the editor workspace. Take it over into Camera Raw. And I gave you one handout that tells you exactly how to open on both Windows and Macs, how to open JPEGs in Camera Raw. And you can follow that if you're not sure how to do it. So we've seen the benefit. Let's go and close this. Don't save it. I'm going to get rid of my elements and bring up my Photoshop CC. Mine doesn't like to open in the workspace. I like, so I'm going to make it Essentials. All right. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the third set, but for those who are working on Photoshop CC, it'll be exactly the same thing I'm doing, but it looks more like what you're looking at. So go to the Photoshop file, open, and come over in the remote class to the group called Oregon Waterfall Series. Again, you can work through the raw file to see the difference, but we're going to take first 4882 raw JPEG. It simply is a JPEG that we want to open in Camera Raw. And if you notice, the format says JPEG. It will not open in Camera Raw unless I tell it to. So I pop it open, and I have to come up alphabetically to Camera Raw. I choose it. Now I know when I click open, it's going to be opening in the Camera Raw window. And again, this one fortunately looks like it's all set to 0. Oh no, it isn't. It's got the whites adjusted. So hit the default button if you can see it. If yours also comes to you and it has remembered earlier adjustments, hitting the default button and then checking the white balance to see that they're 0 and checking down on these extra detail things to be sure they're 0. Now you know the image is like it came from the camera. And if you look at its histogram, it looks like that. It's got a gap. So we're going to go up and move that white point until it gets to the far end. So I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key and pull the white slider over. And when it begins to appear in front of me on the black screen, I back off, lift my fingers. It's the only adjustment I'm going to make for easy comparison. And then I'm going to say Open Image, and it will go over to the Editor Workspace. Now I want to open in the Editor Workspace the other version. So I have to go on my Photoshop menu to File, Open, and then I'm finding the Waterfalls 4882 JPG, no raw word. And then when I click on it, I want to be sure it knows I want the JPEG format, and it does, so that I can click Open. And it will open in the Editor Workspace. And guess what? I can see that it has a gap. So you know what I'm going to do. In Photoshop, my doorway to adjustment layers is at the bottom of the layers panel, and it looks like a bicolor circle. I pop it open, and I choose the word levels. And once again, I have the same situation that I had when I was working with the others. But I can't drag the pixels to the white end. I drag the white point into the pixels. So if I can find the white point and I can hold the Alt or Option key down, this will turn black. And as I come back, I can be warned if I go too far. Oops, I see some pixels. I back up. I don't want any of them to be overexposed. And I lift my hand. So now I have a version that was developed here in the Editor Workspace. And up here, I have a version that was taken into Camera Raw. So here is the histogram for the one that was taken and done directly in the editor. And here's the one that was done in Camera Raw. Now, the slightly change in the appearance is that I didn't make exactly the same adjustment. But all I wanted you to see was that when you have a solid, beautiful histogram, you have solid data. And when you have a histogram that begins to have cuts in pixel fence size, it means some of the data was discarded. And remember, we did one tiny adjustment. If you continued to work on this image in the Editor Workspace, the more you worked on it, the more you would degrade the data. So what is the purpose of this? It's to say when you are forced to develop a JPEG, not a raw file, be sure you do the basic adjusting that you can do in Adobe Camera Raw, because it treats that JPEG as if it were a 12-bit image. We all know JPEGs are 8-bit files. But when you take it into Camera Raw, Photoshop looks at it as if it were a 12-bit image, and it does a much more gentle adjustment. And then you can take it into the Editor Workspace, and you can work further on it there. But at least the basic adjustments will have been done where you get better results. And of course, if you've done a pretty good job at capturing an image, you may not have to do much beside the adjustments you do in Camera Raw. Unless you're treating it with some special effects. The image I see here is quite good right as it is with that one adjustment. So I hope you will have a better understanding of how to get the best from your images. Number one, when you can work in Camera Raw, that's fine, providing you have your JPEG style in your camera as neutral as can be, so that you are looking at a histogram that will match closely your raw data. And then when you have JPEGs and they need to be developed, take the basic development of that JPEG into Adobe Camera Raw Get it to be a balanced image before you go to the workspace of the editor where you can do final work on it.